It's one of the reasons why we're drawn to dogs and babies and things like that, because they look at you through unfettered consciousness. There is no pollution of you by their identity. So they're looking at you without judgment. And I actually think that's one of the greatest gifts you can give someone, to look at another human being without judgment. Because where there's judgment, there's no love, because it's conditional. You know, that's what I'll say during the experience, and that's the source of the tears in some ways, this experience of unconditional love. See, a lot of the love that we think we experience is conditional. You know, it's conditional on our partners behaving a certain way and having certain things and looking a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that experience without identity, completely unconditional. There's no love like that. There's no love like that, unless you got a dog.
I'm here with Mark Waller. Mark is an artist who is passionate about discovering the everyday tiny miracles in the world. In 2016, Mark collapsed in Perth, and it was discovered that he had a mass in his brain and tumors in his lungs. And what happened next changed Mark's life forever. Thank you so much, Mark, for being my guest. I appreciate you coming to spend some time with me.
No problems at all. Thank you for listening to me.
Absolutely. The pleasure is mine. So, you had a brush with death in 2016 when you collapsed out of nowhere. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
In the lead up to that, excuse me, so about 3 years prior to that, I'd had a skin cancer cut off my shoulder. And even though I was having all the tests and stuff, I was pretty sure that it had escaped for some reason, but at the same time didn't believe that it had. I don't know how to explain that. And then, excuse me, gradually built up to being more and more erratic and more crazy. And one of the downsides of being an artist is that people expect you to behave strangely. So some people didn't really spot anything. And to be fair, it only kind of happened at certain occasions. But when I was in Perth, I went to Perth and I collapsed, and, you know, after behaving very strangely, and then was rushed to hospital. And it was late in the evening, and it was kind of all seemed quite surreal, but this lovely Irish nurse said to me, you seem like a straight shooter, so I'm just going to give this to you right between the eyes. You have a mass in your brain and lesions in your lungs, but try not to worry, it might not be cancer. So then basically was sort of booked in for emergency brain surgery 3 days later, because I collapsed on the Thursday night, and then they needed the weekend to organise for me to have surgery on the Monday. So yeah.
Wow. And so you must have been terrified. Were you afraid?
I had probably the most horrific 24, 48 hours of my life, I would say. I had watched my father die from lung cancer. I'd watched a friend of mine when we were very young, probably 18, I'd watched him die from leukemia. And somehow cancer for me was the boogeyman, you know, it was the thing in the back of my head always, you know, it was, you know, it'd sort of pop in and go away, but it was always there somewhere, and I was always terrified of it, especially after seeing what it had done to my friend, who was this fit, healthy, you know, Aussie bloke, and it just literally reduced him to nothing. And so I was horrified, and assumed that that was going to be my future at that point. And if you'd asked me beforehand, so the diagnosis, I should tell you, was stage 4 metastatic melanoma in brain and lungs. And that basically meant, so I'm under the impression that melanoma, particular types of melanoma, double every 16 days. So my tumor was the size of a peach, which meant that if I didn't have brain surgery, I'd be dead pretty quickly. And that, of course, unleashed a whole heap of thoughts about, you know, my children and, you know, all the goals that I thought that I'd had in life and relationships and people I'd loved and, you know, and basically it got everything that I thought was me and shredded it. And so eventually there came this point where, and you know, I'll never forget this for as long as I live. I remember at some point chuckling for some reason and thinking, wow, you sneaky little thing, you know, one cell got away from those doctors, and as clever as we humans think we are, this one cell got away and hid, causing chaos in my body for a couple of years. And I sort of realized that cancer was a process that had been going on forever. It was the reason that I had a thumb was because cells mutate. You know, I couldn't really separate cancer from having a thumb in a weird kind of way. And in some ways, the fact that my body existed the way that it did meant that, you know, cancer was a possibility. So I kind of saw cancer square in the face and realized that it was bigger than me and didn't care what I thought, didn't care what my goals were, didn't care. And I remembered surrendering very clearly, just lying back in the bed and going, all right, let's see how this plays out. And I did have an experience of exquisite peace around that until, you know, before you have brain surgery. Yeah, that was another, you know, like I've learned a lot of things about neurosurgery, which is fun. But in the hospital that I was in, it was a big hospital and there were different lifts. One would take you down to the neuro ward and one would take you to, to the neurosurgery place, garage, whatever you want to call it. You'll probably notice that brain surgery has been excellent for my sense of humor. Maybe not. I'll let everyone else decide. But anyway, so I went down and I remember going down in the lift and these people, the doctors, reading out all these potential side effects. And the last one on the list was death. And then literally, I don't know, it felt like a couple of minutes after that, I powered down basically and had a 6-hour surgery. They removed the side of my head and cut a big hole in it and cut a hole through my brain. My tumor was in my right temporal lobe, which is apparently, I've heard it described as the God center, and that people who meditate the temporal lobes, and I'm not 100% sure, and ultimately it really doesn't matter, but the temporal lobe or the right temporal lobe becomes quite developed, active, I don't know, in people who meditate and pray, apparently. But anyway, so yeah, they cut a big hole in my brain and removed the tumor. And then from there, somewhere in all of that, I went somewhere. I remember asking the doctor later on, I said, did you shine a giant torch into my head? Like, what happened? Because something happened. And, you know, it's been, well, it'll be 8 years this year. And the prognosis was around about 9 months at that time without treatment. But I still can't talk about this without becoming emotional, still to this day. And it's not the brain surgery or the thinking about dying part that makes me emotional. It's the trying to explain what happened during the surgery. And words are completely inadequate. And yeah, I didn't go down a tunnel or anything like that. I just, at some point, was aware that I was aware. There wasn't really any shape or anything. It was this kind of white fizz, I don't, almost like carbonated milk. And I was in it. But from there, I felt myself expand. And expand is sort of, maybe the right word, but it was more like joined, maybe, at the same time as expanding. You can see the limitation of language here. But in that experience, sorry, something happens. I literally saw atoms being constructed and stars being assembled and everything, and it all happening at once. And it wasn't like, an atom formed and then it went here and became a star. It was like I was watching it all happen all at once. And I remember a friend of mine saying, something happened, like, what's going on? I said, oh, I went somewhere during the surgery. And he said, where? I said, everywhere. And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, into the gaps. And he said, what gaps? And I said, all of them. And I've done a lot of reading and I've done a lot of exploration, let's call that, since. And I have some theories about all of that seem to be backed up in experience. But yeah, Mark disappeared and what was left reconnected. We'll call that, say that. Yeah.
Did Mark come back?
Mark comes back occasionally, traffic, things like that.
Okay.
But usually when Mark comes back, Mark suffers. But when I experience the world without Mark, there's no suffering.
So in this experience, you describe it as you became the gaps. Is there
Well, I became the gaps, but everything that wasn't the gaps as well. Like, there was nothing that wasn't me. I don't know how to explain that, but I can say, yes, this is where it gets tricky. I can say that it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. And I still can't talk about it because it was rapturous and still is when I remember.
Are you able to go back to that place? Do you still have direct access to it?
Yeah. I've learned that ultimately all we have is this moment and our attention as physical beings. And most of us direct our attention onto physicality, but we don't direct our attention towards the thing in which all physicality occurs, which is endless and wondrous, and that is consciousness. So for me, or God, whatever you want to call it, for me, I feel like my life's mission is to direct as much attention towards consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it, as I can. These blobs here of bacteria and amino acids and slime took 13.8 billion years to make. Like, there is nothing that this thing here, there's nothing in this thing here that wasn't made in a star somewhere along the line. And science can dissect the human body down to, the atomic level in a way. We know how iron is formed, and we know electrons, and science. And it's wonderful, it's fantastic. But what we don't understand is consciousness. Where does that come from? Where does it end? Like, is there a beginning? Is there an end? Like, we can't measure it. We really know nothing about it. And it seems to me that that's the miracle, because without consciousness, we wouldn't be able to experience being in this body. we wouldn't be able to experience love, joy, all of the things we experience. And yet, most of us spend most of our lives directing our attention towards physicality and not towards the real miracle, which is consciousness. And for me, and maybe, see, I've had brain surgery, so I'm perhaps an anomaly, but for me, when I direct my attention towards consciousness, something happens and the world becomes quieter and more beautiful, and all the shoulds and the shouldn'ts disappear, and laughter appears and silence appears. And yeah, I'm very fond of living without Mark. He causes problems. But it took what? I'm 60 years old. So it took nearly 60 years to make him. So, probably not going to shake him in a hurry.
This consciousness that you become aware of, is that something others can do as well? And if so, how can they do it?
Are you conscious right now?
Yes.
Are you conscious of your left foot?
Yes.
Are you conscious of your body from your head down?
Yes.
Are you conscious of your entire body?
Yes.
Are you conscious of the space in which that body is?
Yes.
Now? Are you conscious of a bubble in which you and I now occur?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask you what it's like, what it feels like while you're conscious of those things?
Awareness, a sense of presence.
Any suffering?
No.
Peaceful?
Very peaceful.
So what was your question?
I see your point. So just becoming aware, is that the key?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Everything that we experience occurs in consciousness. And it seems to me that most of us direct our attention to the things in consciousness rather than consciousness itself. So it's almost like if you have a bucket full of marbles and you direct, and each one of those marbles is a should or a shouldn't, or a must or a mustn't, or whatever, or a story or whatever. And if you're directing your attention at one of those marbles, then all of a sudden everything becomes very busy, because the marbles are all touching one another ultimately. And I'm using a metaphor here, saying our brain, like each of our thoughts are connected to one another, and they're usually tied back at some way to identity, which occurs in consciousness. But if you draw your attention towards consciousness itself, all the marbles in the bucket disappear. I'm not sure if that's a good analogy, but
No, it
it's
makes
like
sense.
all of,
It does make
yeah,
sense.
okay, great. I'm not sure I do a lot of the time, so but not my fault. Brain surgery, just saying. Someone said to me, is brain surgery, I'm so sorry about that. And I said, oh, don't be. It's the best great get out of jail free card you've ever had. It's not my fault.
So
I can
I want
almost
to
say
go
anything.
back to touch on your near-death experience a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you're under anesthesia, you are having brain surgery, and you go out into this other realm, or is it another realm, or is it a realm that's right here? But you expand
Yeah,
out.
it's all the realms.
What happens next?
What do you mean next?
Is there a next? Are you just existing in this space always?
There would have to be time for there to be a next. And time only relates to physicality. Can I ask you, when you did that exercise before, when you were conscious, were you aware of time?
I wasn't thinking of time, no.
No. See, time relates directly to physicality, and where there is time, there's decay, and where there is time, there is change. But outside of physicality, there is no decay or rebuilding or recycling, or there just isness. I vowed I'd never use that word. But there is just this let's just call it rapture. Let's just call it that. I look, again, words aren't they're not adequate. They're not even, if you think about, like, so everything about physicality. So we have ears, of course. Our ears are paltry tools for experiencing sound. A dog can hear sounds way beyond what we can. You know, dolphins can hear sounds that we can't. So, you know, we can all agree that our hearing is a very limited thing. Our eyes, for example, an eagle can see a mouse from like a kilometre away. I'm lucky to see you at the moment on the screen. But our eyes only see a very limited amount of light and limited wavelengths of light. So our eyes are incredibly limited. And our sensitivity, same, you know, with our hands, we can touch things, but there are certain things that are so soft we can't feel them, and other things that are so indescribably painful that it completely overwhelms our senses. So our sense of touch and dexterity, while amazing, are still limited. So everything about our physical body is a limitation. And then we have consciousness, and then we impose an identity on it, which of course is a limitation. So everything about existing in the physical world is a limitation. And I don't think that there is another place that we go to. I think there's just everywhere. But in death, we shed all the limitations.
That's interesting to think about, how we're limited in this physical body, and when the physical body is shed, then we're just unlimited. Would we
Yeah.
become, I have heard near-death experiencers say that we become everything, or they became everything, they expanded like you did. Is that
Yeah.
something
Well,
that you
no, I
experienced?
would suggest that they became aware that they were everything.
Okay.
Yeah. Because look, I mean, if you think about it now, like, you know, I haven't had breakfast yet, but I'm going to go and eat a pawpaw and some fruit. Now, I grew them in my garden. Now, I know for a fact that that fruit that grew in that garden, I've been in that garden for 20 years. Most of it is recycled plants and, you know, organic matter. So basically, I'm eating dead things, which in turn grew on dead things, which in turn grew on dead things, so everything my body is made out of is stuff that's been recycled out of the dirt. So if you'd have said to me, where did I begin, this body begin? I can't tell you, because I don't know where it ends now, because part of me later on, you know, I'm shedding skin. As we think we're so wonderful, we human beings. We shed a mess everywhere we go. Hair, skin, dead cells, all this stuff. We leave this trail of stuff behind us. And I read somewhere, and I'm not sure how true it is, but that every 7 years, with the exception of the enamel on our teeth, I think we basically have swapped most of the cells in our body. So this body that I'm sitting here in 7 years, will no longer be the same body. And these bodies themselves are in a constant state of evolution, and I call it wobbling. Everything's a wobble, you know. When you see me through your eyes, that's wavelength, that's a wobble. You hear, that's a wobble, you know. And this body is also a wobble. It's a collection of cells which sticks together for a while and then disappears. and then sticks to a wire together and disappears. But the consciousness itself behind all of that, behind the identity, is unchanged, completely unchanged. And it's one of the reasons why we're drawn to dogs and babies and things like that, because they look at you through unfettered consciousness. There is no pollution of you by their identity. So they're looking at you without judgment. And I actually think that's one of the greatest gifts you can give someone, to look at another human being without judgment. Because where there's judgment, there's no love, because it's conditional. You know, that's what I'll say during the experience, and that's the source of the tears in some ways, this experience of unconditional love. See, a lot of the love that we think we experience is conditional. You know, it's conditional on our partners behaving a certain way and having certain things and looking a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that experience without identity, completely unconditional. There's no love like that. There's no love like that. Unless you got a dog. Not sure where I went there. I went off on a tangent.
I wanted to ask you, so would you say that consciousness is synonymous with God?
Yeah. I think that people throughout history have experienced consciousness without the identity and called it God. That's my opinion. Yeah. Because we can do another little exercise if you want.
Let's do it.
Okay. So again, you're conscious of your body?
Yes.
Okay. And you're conscious of a bubble in which you and I occur?
Yes.
Are you conscious of the town in which you're in or city?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just out of curiosity, see if you can find an end to consciousness. You can find an edge.
I don't even know where to start. I don't. It would be like your imagination. You can go on forever, right?
Yeah, except don't use your imagination.
Okay.
Because your imagination relies on knowledge or past or, you know. See, do you know what our greatest asset is?
What is it?
It's our imagination. Do you know what our greatest liability is?
I'm going to guess our imagination.
Yeah. And, you know, I learned that in the hospital because I literally was lying there in the bed and in my imagination, I was living the horror show that was my father's last moments and all of my stories about cancer and that all of this, the horror. And I was using my imagination to experience a future I thought was going to happen. 8 years later, cancer-free, sitting here, having had a blast, you know, would never have imagined that that was happening. But if I'd used my imagination, and I remember thinking, you don't know what's going to happen. How about you just sit back and watch? Just let's see what happens. And, you know, I had radiation and, you know, all the bits and pieces, 2 years of treatments and all that sort of thing. But every time I started to hurt, when I looked closely, and it hurt, I mean in here, it was my imagination. Because if I sit here right now in this chair, I'm perfectly safe. If I'm lying in a hospital bed with a sheet over me, I'm perfectly safe in that moment. It was only the projected future that was causing me to suffer. So my imagination needs to be managed. But anyway, sorry, back to the exercise. So don't use your imagination. Okay. So you're aware now of a bubble in which you and I occur, and you're aware now that you're not able to find an edge or an end to imagination. To consciousness.
I'm not, no.
Okay. I'm wondering what we would call something that had no end and that permeated everything.
Infinity? God?
Yeah, well, and other people call it something else.
God.
Yeah. So here's a little question. Think of someone you love. Well, actually, so if you think about consciousness and we've thought that we can't find an end, and I can't think of anything, I can't see anything or think of anything in which consciousness isn't present. Can you?
No?
So if consciousness is everywhere and we can't find an end to it, perhaps it has no end. And if it has no end, it must be eternal. So if you think about someone you love, can you find an end to the love? Not to them, to the love.
Not at all.
Okay. So if you can't find an end to the love, perhaps it's eternal.
For sure.
Perhaps if consciousness and love are both eternal, they must be the same thing, ultimately.
They must.
So if I was to say to you, are you conscious right now? You could say, yes, I'm love.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And that was going to be what I was going to ask you to describe what consciousness is. And you just kind of explained that it's
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I'm writing a little book at the moment. I'm flippantly calling it the Two Commandments, but in my opinion, there's ultimately only two commandments. I'm actually being a bit cheeky. I'm calling it Two Commandments plus one, but working title. But the two commandments ultimately are play, and enjoy being alive, enjoy the gift of life, enjoy physicality, enjoy the dance of atoms and on this little blob of dirt in the middle of space. So there's that, but then the other one is I say be light. And by be light, I think when you say that, you get a few confused looks, but the second that people start thinking about it, they know exactly what you mean. And by being light means, not taking everything too seriously, obviously, but also by being inspirational, being kind, being present, meeting people, at their level. One of the things I learned about cancer is that people unconsciously quite often divide themselves into three groups. And one of those groups is they're obviously confronted by death and mortality. And so I call them the invisibles. So they'll be in your life all the time, and then you'll get sick, and then you will see the back of their heel as they disappear down an aisle at the shopping center because they don't know how to talk to you. And that's fine. That's fine, but it's more about their fear of death or illness than anything to do with you. So that's the first group, the invisibles. And then the next group is the no but reallys. And they're the ones who say, how are you? And you say, I'm well. And they go, no, but really. So they're super fun. You can really mess with them. And my favorite group are the reals. So they're the ones who go, oh, did you have radiation? I go, yep. And they go, did you get a superpower? I go, yep. And they go, what is it? And I said, X-ray vision. Please do some work on your body, or something like that, And we just make jokes, and it's fun. Those people brought lightness to a really heavy situation. And I noticed that in my interactions with them, there's light. And so now if I see someone who I think has cancer or has an injury or whatever, I just talk to them because everyone wants to be seen. Everyone wants to be seen. Again, light. So to me, being light, I used to say giving light, but you can't give light. We are actually all light. We just don't know it. because I use the word light and consciousness and love and God. They're all the same thing in this sense.
And talking about superpowers, were you able to bring back any gifts from the other side, like a clairsentience, clairvoyance, anything like that?
A large amount of gold and jewelry, which was useful. No, no. Look, what I came back with was look. I think unfettered consciousness is the gift. I think that I don't know that you'd call it a gift. It's almost I really don't know how to explain that. It's I can see people now in a way that I never could before.
Mm-hmm.
I can see people's pain quite clearly. And I can also see how people's identity has formed their physique, we'll call it. What we don't realize is that where we direct our consciousness plays out in how we move our body, how we carry ourselves. You know, when you see someone walking down the street with their head down, I know that when I put my head down, what that means is that there's a lot going on and I'm trying to reduce information generally. So by looking down at the ground, I'm narrowing all the input. And so you can usually tell people who are walking along with their heads down have got a lot of mind stuff going on, you know. And it doesn't take long if you're doing that repeatedly for your shoulders to hunch. And it doesn't take long for your neck to form. You know, our bodies respond reasonably quickly to behavior, you know, and you see, you know, often the most scared people are the ones who are trying to make themselves look the scariest. And you see these blokes, you know, like that, and they'll do that, and they'll have stiff necks and sore necks, or they'll make their body big, but they don't look after the lower half of their body, and so their spine becomes tight and they become inflexible in the hips. And, you know, and look, these are all theories. I don't actually know. I don't walk up to someone and say, excuse me, are you really, really scared and you're doing a lot of weights and you've got a lot of weights, a lot of muscles and tattoos to protect yourself. Have done it a few times, and guess what? They've gone, yep. Talked to this bloke on an airplane the other day, and I said, there was three of us, and there's a little, really, really little skinny scientist fella in the middle, and me, and I'm not small, and this other guy who was huge. And I made a stupid joke. I said, oh, don't, because this poor little fella looked terrified. This is hairy me and this giant guy. And I said, look, don't worry, fella. I use an appearance of confidence and humor to hide the fact that I'm terrified. An old mate sitting next to you uses his muscles and his tattoos to hide the fact that he's terrified. And I said, we're all terrified of one another. And this little science guy goes, I use my knowledge to hide that I'm scared. I said, is that right? And the big fella on the outside was laughing, and and the little fella looked at him because you could see him going, how's this bloke taking it? And he goes, he's right. But we outed ourselves, you know, So it was all safe. It wasn't like I only outed him, you know, I dragged us all down. So, yeah, but that's the truth. We're all terrified of one another. And so we carry this facade around with us and it's weight. And so we're not light, you know, we carry a facade around ourselves, which is ridiculous because we're all doing it. It's ridiculous.
Do you still do it?
Of course, I'm a human being. Have been fading in and out of this in this conversation, but you know, I don't think the idea is to necessarily be free from it. When I came out of the surgery, I was like a child. it was like the first time I had experienced anything. I would have walked in front of a bus. I was like a toddler. It was beautiful. It was the most exquisite experience. And everything was magical and glorious and incredible. And all I could see was light everywhere. And it was just wonderful. And I would have lasted 10 minutes. I would have been hit by a car or something. So identity is not, it's not a bad thing. It's just a tool. And any tool becomes a liability very quickly if you can't put it down. I mean, if you look at any tradesman who has a belt full of tools, try having a bath or a swim with them. They're great when he's at work, but he doesn't take them home with him. And I think this is the problem. Identity is a tool for survival, ultimately. That's what it's for. I created an identity in order to fit in with all of the other human beings so that I could either A, not be judged, or B, not be picked on, or C, not isolated, or whatever it is. So it's actually about survival. And if you consider that another word for survival would be fear, we can start to see the limitations of identity. Because what happens is we use our identity to navigate relationships. Now, I can't think of anything that would cause more problems than trying to navigate a relationship with fear, as opposed to navigating a relationship with love. So identity is useful in certain circumstances, but not useful in others. And I actually truly believe that humanity is evolving, and that the next step in evolution is us seeing the delusion and the limitations of personal identity and having the wisdom to choose when to use the identity and when. So in other words, a greater awareness.
You said you believe that humanity is evolving. Do you feel
Yeah.
like the evolution has accelerated over the past
Yes.
few decades?
Yes. Yeah. Social media is a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
It has an opportunity for destructive identities to have a voice. It also has an opportunity for expanded awareness to be seen. And there are some people doing, YouTube stuff to help with that. Just saying.
There are
Or
some people.
shows. Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately we can't stop it. We can't stop it. We can slow it down and suffer for longer, or we can accelerate it.
What do you think is going
And
to happen when we
what's that?
wake up? What do you think is going to happen when we wake up?
Well, I can't say for sure, but I will say this, that when I came out of hospital, and I would suggest for probably 2 or 3 years afterwards, I lived with a very diminished. I experienced life where my identity had a very limited hold on my experience of life. I noticed that I was incredibly content. So my desire for more disappeared. I was incredibly at peace. So my need to protect myself and be in conflict with others disappeared. My calling to be of service to other people amplified because I was able to see people suffering. And so I was pulled to be of service. I saw that when I sat with people who were sick, I was able to bring them light, and I was able to laugh, and still do. I spent a lot of time talking to cancer people, and I saw that I was indescribably patient because I didn't have anywhere to be, I didn't, all of the shoulds and the shoulds disappeared. You know, if you think about most of our suffering, if you trace it back, you'll find a should or a shouldn't. And in that experience of seeing the delusion of identity, should and shouldn't disappear. So I can only speak for me, but in my mind, if everyone experienced that, I cannot even begin to imagine how exquisite this planet would be. The human world would be. The planet's exquisite already. It's only humans that make it complicated. I mean, I have yet to meet someone, if you sat them down and said, would you like to live on a planet in which all human beings made space for one another and treated each other with love and kindness, and in a space where you were content and at peace? Would you want that? I've never met anyone who'd say no, ever.
No.
And, you know, ultimately all of our striving, this is the ironic thing, is that all of our striving, see, you know, when you live with death, the words rest in peace become very, very interesting, because we say rest in peace, but none of us live in peace. We don't live in peace. We're constantly chasing, striving, more, faster, better. Da, da, da. When I have this, this will happen. And so we're constantly busy. And when I find that when you look at that busyness, it's usually, if you trace it out far enough, it's usually in some way to get you more peace. And even people who are committing violent crimes, it's because they want money so that they can be secure in some way. And another word for security is peace. So we are all chasing peace ultimately. And once identity is seen for what it is, then peace is experienced. And I'm lazy. I don't want to do all that work chasing stuff and, you know, working, you know, what is it? What do they call it? Grinding. I don't want to do that. I want to go surfing. You know, like I said, it took 13.8 billion years of stars collapsing to make this thing. I'm not going to wait till I retire to enjoy my life. You know, most of the men I met in the chemo ward in 2 years had just retired. They'd spent their whole life working so that they could enjoy their life, and they were diagnosed with cancer. We've only got this moment, and most of us, our attention is into a future that we might have one day when we have enough money. I think that's a shame.
I would agree. That happened to my dad. He retired and shortly after was diagnosed with cancer, and then was gone in 4 years. So I can understand that deeply.
And we're all complicit in a society that facilitates that.
Well, you are a very talented artist, and there's a painting behind you that you are working on. Do you find, or do you use your art to get the message of your spiritual, well, to get your spiritual message across? I know words escape us. These experiences are ineffable. And so do you think it's easier with art to portray an experience?
I think it's a gateway. It's a gateway. So, you know, when you go, if you go to the beach or you go somewhere beautiful, there's this moment where you see the beauty in something and the identity shuts up. We all, you know, if I was to ask you when you're enjoying your life the most, I'm going to suggest to you that most of those moments are when you're not there, when you're in the flow or you're in a dance with what is. So in other words, when you're not there is when you truly see the world truthfully. It's without the pollution of identity. And so for me, when I experience something and paint it, I'm almost like a heroin addict. And like I go, oh, this is, and in that moment of awe, Mark's disappeared. and it's beautiful. And then I get to paint it. And while I'm painting it, Mark disappears. But then I put some of that all on there. And so my job is not necessarily to regurgitate what I'm seeing. It's to I find something that lights me up, and then I paint it. And hopefully someone else will see that and go, oh, I'll tell you a story. So there's a guy around town. He's a builder. He's a lovely bloke, but he's an Aussie bloke. And don't do feelings, mate. That's a bloody waste of time, that kind of thing. And he comes and sits and talks to me every now and then. And he was watching me paint something. And he goes, you painted that shadow purple. And I went, yep. And he goes, it's not like that. I went, isn't it? He goes, no. Oh, I don't like it anymore. And I went, fair enough. I bumped into him 2 weeks later and he goes, what have you done to me? I said, what do you mean? It's bloody purple everywhere. I went, is there? See, people think my paintings are pretty, but they're not. They're subversive in this society, this culture, because what they are is they're moments of silence in which I'm truly experiencing what is. And I'm putting them on canvas. And then someone else will take them home and put them on their wall. And hopefully they'll just walk past it and go, oh, I've never noticed that before. And then all of a sudden the world's different. And look, it's a tiny, tiny incremental little shift in consciousness. But, maybe it gets a slightly better result than standing on a soapbox on the corner and saying the end is nah. I don't know. I haven't tried that. Maybe I should try that. I don't know.
And you said you had a book releasing soon. Do you have another book?
I wrote a book about the experience, and it's called All About the Light. And interestingly enough, I actually wrote it in the hospital with one finger on my phone, like that. And I've got a girl who works with me, and she put the whole thing together. She's an absolute gem. She put the whole thing together, and we put this book out. And we self-published it because I don't know anything about publishing. I don't know anything about a lot of things. That's one of the other greatest gifts about this whole experience is I know nothing about anything, which is wonderful. But I am writing this other book, which is, as I said, called The Two Commandments. I've actually got another one that I'm writing as well, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I'm just writing it down and hoping that someone somewhere along the line will go, well, that sounds like a great idea. I can help. You never know. Either that or it'll go to my grave with me. Who knows?
Well, I think it's wonderful that you are putting words to paper in order to help others understand
It
all the
does.
wisdom that you've gained through the years from this experience.
Well, and it is a funny old thing because I'm a joker. Like I make jokes out of everything. I'll make jokes out of cancer. I make jokes out of brain surgery. I do that. But it's interesting because when you say the word wisdom, that kind of grates a little bit in that I go, I'm just a clown who says dumb stuff. But maybe that's the wisdom. Who knows? But I do feel that the stuff that I'm writing, I have shared it with a few people. And most of the things that I've spoken to you about are conversations that come up when I'm talking to people with cancer. Because when you survive cancers, particularly the cancer, because no one expected it. Even my oncologist said, I didn't expect this. But people come to you wanting for you to give them hope. And this sounds harsh, but I'm not interested in giving people hope. I am interested in facilitating peace in people. And anything that comes, hope has a fear attached to it. And anything that comes out of love will ultimately be more sustainable and more enjoyable and more compelling. So for me, I'm not interested in giving hope, but I'm interested in pointing towards peace. So if anything I can do to write that down and give people peace, then I'll do it. And if it's meant to be in the world, it will be. So if there's any
Obviously,
publishers out there and editors, let me know.
obviously, you're here with us, so you came back from this conscious expansion that you experienced during your brain surgery. What do
Hmm.
you believe happens once we're dead? Our bodies are shed and we stay.
I think that I think that living, I think that experiencing life as identity is a limitation, and that shedding the identity, whether that be in death or through meditation or whatever, is a release of the narrowing of consciousness, and that we then become aware that we are all of it and not a separate identity. We are all of it. We cannot separate our bodies from the rest of the universe. We cannot separate our consciousness from the rest of the universe. We are all of it, all at once. And I think that death brings that realization.
Are you afraid of death?
No such thing. There's an end to the body, sure. I'm not afraid of the end of the body. I'm not keen on the discomfort that happens that comes with it sometimes, but that's just Mark speaking. I used to think I was 6 foot tall and bulletproof. Now I know I'm not 6 foot tall, but I am bulletproof.
I love your outlook on life, your philosophy. It's beautiful. If my viewers wanted to find you to purchase your books or check out your art, how can they find you?
I had a really nice Instagram account that got hacked. So now apparently it's selling Bitcoin. So don't go to that one. But I've got, I have most of the stuff that I do now in the world comes up. I've got a YouTube channel, Explore Acrylic Painting. And I've got most of the stuff happens through my website, Explore Acrylic Painting. And look, to be honest, I actually don't know what happens with most of that. I've got, as I said before, a wonderful girl who works with me, and she does everything. She is a long-suffering saint, that woman, but she does everything. And Explore Acrylic Painting seems to be the way that people track me down.
And I'll
So I
link
wanted to make a stupid joke there, but look at me go. Self-regulation. Well done, Mark.
I'll link everything down below in the video description. If anyone wants to find you, they can just easily click there. And before we go, do you have any last words of wisdom?
Probably not wisdom. I will say this, don't listen to anything I've said. I've had brain surgery. But the greatest thing you can ever have is peace. Maybe that's it. It's all we ever want, ultimately. And that everything we're chasing is ultimately for peace. So maybe we should just go straight to peace.
Skip everything else.
Yeah. As I said, I'm lazy. Having said that, though, there is a fair chance I'm going to get frustrated with someone in traffic. I haven't transcended this experience yet.
Like you said, we're all humans having a human experience.
It'd be a shame not to enjoy being angry every now and then, wouldn't it?
Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's been a beautiful experience for me to spend some time with you today, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
My pleasure. I hope it made sense. I just kind of blather stuff out, so I hope it made sense, and I hope it's useful.
It was very, very good, useful information for sure, and everything made sense. So,
Wow. I'll have to tell all my friends that I made sense. It's nice.
oh,
They'll be shocked.
thank you. I'll be in touch soon.
Okay, lovely. Lovely to meet you.
You too. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people, and that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.